So let's get started. I'm going to take you a little bit through my journey because I've been, as I said, the scribe, analyst, cheerleader, advocate, organizer for the information industry now since 1985. So I've seen most of the developments that have gone on in the industry, and I've been able to watch them as a neutral facilitator between data providers, data originators, and data consumers, and I also include the regulators. And I started off with an organization called the Information Industry Association, which was the organization of all of the content owners. So these were magazines, newspapers, market research, things of that nature, who recognized that their product was content, right? And all of our product is content, and all of us. I encourage everybody to think of themselves as an internal publisher because that is pretty much what you are doing. And we had to learn the difference between the medium that we were delivering it on and the actual content itself. And that was a big lesson for a lot of these organizations. And we were struggling with identification issues and commercial issues and how to talk across the ecosystem about things like data quality. The big lesson there was that at every technological step, the owners thought they were cannibalizing their children and they were afraid of the next activity. And every single big innovation opened up the market by a magnitude. So change brings opportunity, even though we are all resistant to it. Around 2005, all of the big financial institutions, stock exchanges, big brokerage, and all the vendors got together and asked me to form the EDM Council. And I did that for, 14 years and watched the evolution of data management from what are you talking about all the way up through the, kind of maturity cycle, if you will. What we noticed there was, of course, the problem of fragmentation and the challenges that everybody had in harmonizing meaning and in facilitating integration. And make no mistake about it, the number one objective still is about integrating data across all of our organizations so that we're feeding our applications with trusted content. We went through a lot of developments. There was a lot of, love of golden copy and concepts like that sound good and philosophically are good, but are impractical to implement. That was the birth of the chief data officer. In fact, having the CDO was one of my metrics for my compensation. I was the founder and sponsor for DCAM, the Data Management Capability Model, worked with DAMA on their body of knowledge. I also did the Carnegie Mellon CMMI, and I'm now working on the maturity model for semantic technology. I was also the sponsor for ontology way back in the original one. This is FIBO, for we're trying to deal with the definition of the contractual requirements of financial products. Then we had the financial crisis of 2008, and I found myself being recruited to serve on a bunch of different regulatory advisory committees. I was the chairman of the Treasury's Financial Research Advisory Committee right after the 2008 breakdown. I sat on the Financial Stability Board for LEI, Legal Entity Identification, and I was part of the CFTC's Technical Advisory Committee during the derivatives challenge. What you realize through all of that change is the concept of linked risk and linked processes. And I will encourage all of you still to go back and read BCBS 239 or the Principles of Risk Data Aggregation, one of the best reports I've ever seen come out of the regulatory world. They described it exactly right to capture the problem. And I'm going to go into that a little bit in a moment. Right after that, Columbia approached me to create a class on the principles of data management, which I did and taught for 4 years. The big lesson there, besides the fact that I was able to synthesize everything I learned, was the difference between those who were dealing with analytics, because I was in the School of Applied Analytics, and the concept of data meaning and data governance, and those two did not mesh very well. In 2019, the industry asked me to form this Enterprise Knowledge Graph Foundation to try to encourage the development of semantic standards and knowledge graph. The big lesson in all of this is that there is something I'll call core data management, which is what most people are currently engaged in. Critical, understanding governance and accountabilities, and you have to do all of your lineage and traceabilities and roles, responsibility. All of that is critical. But governance does not fix the problem, right? So it's essential, but it's not sufficient to fix the problem. And if we want to address the reality of the data dilemma and turn it into a data resource, we have to fix the problem. I also learned there were a lot of delusions that we were under. I'm going to go through that in a little bit in a moment. And I'm going to suggest that there is a way to fix this problem. And the way is a standards-based approach using the resources of the web. And Terry, you were mentioning this up front. There really is a holy trinity of data management of identification, identity, meaning resolution, and its expression in standards. So let me get into that in a bit. And then I currently am working at Semantic Arts. I'm the chief marketing officer, helping Dave kind of repackage their technical orientation into a business framework. And I'm a real fan of what Dave's done because he advocates simplicity. He advocates standards, and he has an appropriate methodology that says it's not rip and replace. You can do this incrementally and get value at every step. So I'm quite happy to work for Dave. All right, so let me just give you the upfront answer to all of this, right? So the first, let's recognize there is what I call a prime directive for data management. And that is a very simple directive, right? To give to your users data that they have trust and confidence in to be exactly what it was when it originated without the need for reconciliation and transformation. That is the goal then, and it's the goal still. The thing is, of course, we haven't achieved that goal. We have two big dilemmas. And I'm going to talk about that in depth in a moment. But the first one, of course, is fragmented technology, which is nobody's fault. That's just the way it evolved. And we have the limitations of our relational world, which is structured into columns and rows. So these give us the two dilemmas of data incongruence, doesn't match marriage counseling problem between our repositories, and structural rigidity, so we have to constantly reformat our data in order to query it. So the goal is, remember, to give the users the tools they need to be able to use the data. They should not be spending their time as data janitors. And that's what we're doing, right? So this problem that exists, which I'm going to explain, does cause a huge liability. Right? It is probably 40 to 50% of your IT budget is spent on integration. And there's lots of redundancies. There's lots of business frustration. There's lots of extension of time to value. When you look at the value equation of making a transformation versus what it costs an industry in opportunity and in real dollars, it's overwhelming. The solution, there is a solution. This problem can be solved, right? And the way you solve it is what most people are doing, let's call that data hygiene, plus semantic standards that allow you to fix the problem actually, so that it is no longer the driving force within your organization. So you look at, I'll call it the three C's of value of cost, capability, and control. All of them are delivered. I'm going to give you that a little bit more in depth. And this can be done incrementally, right? So it is not rip and replace. It is not a technology solution. It is not really expensive. The problem is always organizational and overcoming inertia and operating in a different mindset. That is the limitation. It is not a technical constraint in any way. Let me start by giving you just a bit of philosophy, because I dig philosophy. And these four people, I think, were the foundations of what we're currently doing. Right? With Aristotle, it's how do we understand the world? How do we describe it in a way that is precise and to make things different from each other? Linnaeus, of course, gave us classifications. How do we understand that this is different from that based on its characteristics? Al-Kindi was the father of inference, and we put these all together, and you add that with Ludwig Wittgenstein, who told us that language needs to be understood in context. And if you think about it, this is still the dilemma that we are all trying to work on. It's been around since the dawn of man. There are two things to keep in mind as you listen to this presentation. The first is my side of the equation. This is the realm of content. And in the financial industry, that is the structure and rates and dates and capabilities and prices and calculation formulas and capitalization and all the things that go on in an underlying contractual world of finance that we have to represent with precision, right? Because they're linked to contractual obligations. That's the meaning side of the equation, which is different, of course, from the technology side of the equation. And I love technology. Technology has been the driver. Unfortunately, we all assume that because technology was the driver of innovation in our organizations, that it's the right place for the management of meaning. And fundamentally, it's not, right? These are partners. These are not the same thing. And having technology own data is never worked in my observation. So I'm going to talk about the left side of the equation, the meaning side, and let's start by making sure that we're clear about what meaning is, because it's very, very simple. And I think there's only three ideas that need to be understood. And it's all based in this concept that we are representing real stuff, right? It's customers, products, processes, people, entities. That is what we represent, right? So it's real things. We can represent it in a real way. And the first part of that, of course, is identity, right? What is this thing and where is this thing? And the problem is, of course, there are many identifiers. And we sit and we try to reconcile identifiers that have been modified for their own processes. And we're sitting here trying to recreate an activity to understand what and where these things are. And then you take meaning, and meaning is only based on two ideas, right? The first one is simple facts that we can verify, things, and this is for legal entities, things like names and addresses and dates of registration and things of that nature, and relationship facts, right? And it's that concept of simple facts and relationship facts that describe things precisely. There is no two things that have the same combination of simple facts and relationship facts. So we can conceptually define every idea with absolute precision. So there's two, let's call them core ontological questions, right? What type of thing is it, right? That's the simple and relationship facts. And what makes it different from any other thing, with the concept that we can inherit, but ultimately there might be a change down the line. So keep all of this philosophy in mind, and let's get into it. And the other day, I remember I was thinking about, why is there a problem? And why do we accept this problem? And if you look at this from the user's point of view, I came up with this data bill of rights. And I believe that we should all have the right to expect our data to be true to its original intent, not transformed and incongruent and not matching. We have the right to have it defined because it represents real things. We have the right to have it available and accessible when we want it, when we need it, as part of our inventories. We have a right to have it in a way that's easy to use, not stuck in rigid schemas that make it difficult for us to ask business questions and get business answers. We have a right to have it traceable as it flows across processes. It should not be lost in the hairball of technology that exists in many countries. And it should be testable, based in mathematical axioms, and reusable because it's not that many concepts that exist in in any activity. So if you get the concepts right, they are reusable over and over again, and all of a sudden, this problem becomes much easier to manage. So before I talk about how to do it, let me talk about what is required in order to have a successful activity. And the first is you got and I say you, I mean exec management when I say you, because I talk to senior management. This is a strategic problem. We mostly operate in the next quarter spreadsheet, right? So trying to fix it tactically, and tactics are important, is not the same as understanding that data is a process within our organizations equivalent to technology, people, and operational processes. Senior management must understand the causes and implications of both incongruence of data and structural rigidity of our technology environments. Because if you don't understand that, the rest of it becomes meaningless, right? That's the rationale for why we do it. As I said before, this is not a technology problem. Data content is not best managed by technology. I love technology. Technology is the partner, but it is not the same thing. There is core data management. I spent most of my career trying to understand and document that and measure it and figure out how to deal with it. This is all, we call it governance, but it is roles, accountabilities, funding, lineage and traceability, domains, all of the things that most of you probably do. The biggest obstacle is not technological, it is cultural. This is a problem of organizational inertia and understanding and embracing transitions. That is hard to do. And you got to talk to people in the way that they understand, right? Because we have technology that's got a different view than business, has a different view than finance, different from executives. We've got to be able to talk to everybody without losing them in the words that describe our narrow activities. They don't care. They just want to make it sure that it works, and they want to have trust and confidence that you know what you're doing. So I'm going to apologize for the complexity of the slide, but really it's got three simple ideas. In blue, you'll see the problem of ancient technology, and I'll go over that in a second. In green, you've got ideas that or delusions that we need to address, and then in the orange, you have the obstacles to implementation. So what's the problem? And I'm going to try to say this a couple different ways, right? We have an application-centric world of which all of those applications are driven by software, and they all have their own glossaries, they all have their own dictionaries, they all deal with a different level in our organization, and they're proprietary. So we have customized code that is not reusable, it's not able to be matched up, so we spend our life reconciling and trying to get things to go back together. We put this in our relational world, which is rigid, right? So we have relationships that have to be explicitly expressed in the structure of the technology environment. And if you want to look at a different viewpoint, you have to restructure your tables and joins and foreign keys and things of that nature. 80% of the data in many organizations is copied and cloned, transformed realigned back to proprietary software, and all of a sudden you have silos. That's the definition. All of this stuff is brittle. We kept building it because we were kind of operating in that short view, and now we are afraid to change it because it drives critical business processes, right? So we're afraid of disrupting the hornet's nest. That's the definition of technical debt, all of this together. Rigid tables, joins, keys, unable to trace systems, complexity, hairballs that we've created. We just have to understand that's the problem that we have. Up until now, we've been trying to fix that problem with some big concepts, right? The idea of a single version of truth, which logically makes sense, but practically is impossible to implement because there's always going to be copies. So we don't want a single version of the truth physically. We want a single version of the truth conceptually. We want the data to be aligned to meaning so that the single version exists regardless of where the data resides. The idea of these massive canonical models that have every process, it's too complex. The world is too complex to be able to model everything. And there's no need because the ideas that we can hook things to are rather simple. We build these giant canonical models and they're outdated as soon as they're done. So they're kind of useless. And the two big concepts that we have to focus in on are identity resolution, right? Because we transform and rename everything over and over again, and the meaning of things. Right? Those are the two big concepts that we must align on. We also have this idea of what I call requirements-led design. So doing an application for some important business executive, which sounds good and is good in a narrow sense, but that leads it to be hardwired in a proprietary way, not reusable, and all of a sudden you've just built another silo. And we have business rules that are not machine readable, they're inconsistent, and then the big challenges of organizational impatience and our constant quest for something magical that will fix all of our problems. There is no magic, just go standards. Really, that's all there is to it. All right, so what are the problems? The first one, as I say, is fragmented IT, right? So we've got all these silos, we've got all this transformation, no reference to common meaning. Meaning is not aligned with the data, it's kept separately, and it's done by reference. So precision of meaning is lost. And that's because all the systems are proprietary, and we have many, many, many of these in our organization. So there's reusability challenges. The infrastructure is brittle, right? We don't separate the logic from the code, from ETL. It's hard to understand. It's hard to trace, not documented, hard to reconcile. And of course, the four horsemen of the data management apocalypse: ignorance, arrogance, obsolescence, and power. They kind of run rampant through a lot of organizations, and we have to recognize that's the fundamental activity. I was fortunate to have worked with the chief technology officer from the US Department of Defense who implemented semantic technology of the DoD. And I stole this slide from him because I thought it was a perfect illustration of the challenge and the problem that we face. And if you look over on the left side, those are all of the columns, rows, messages, data elements that exist in every system. And as we add more and more, they constantly go on forever. But there are only a limited number of concepts, and it's a surprisingly limited number of concepts. And when you start to get all those concepts defined, they become reusable. So it's the gap between these concepts and physical elements that allows, that's the cost savings to an organization. Now, I am keen on relational. It's been around for 50 years, and it's been around because it does good stuff. It's good stuff for sorting and computing and retrieval of records, but it has limitations because it is structurally rigid with relationships that are explicitly male, they don't scale, and data, meaning, is separate from the data itself. And that is the nature of our problem. So what's the implications? And all of these are actual quotes that I took from all of the industry throughout my career. First problem is we can't find all this stuff. We have copies and it's not well documented and we can't search for it and we don't know the resources that exist. It's not available to the analyst, so therefore we duplicate it because we can't find it and we need it and we don't have a process to prevent it from being duplicated. We can't link it because it doesn't match either in identity or in meaning, right? So there's always battles over debate of meaning. It's hard to aggregate. We can't get a consolidated view. And this wonderful quote of my projects end up as expensive death marches of data cleansing and manipulation just to make the software work. That's the world that I think and I see we operate in. We have this problem of collaboration because now we've got silos that operate independently under their own pressure. We don't play nice together in a sandbox, and altogether, that leads to the challenge. We don't have trust and confidence in the data to be what we want, when we want it, without reconciliation, and that's the fire drills that exist throughout organizations. Just to reinforce what I said, right? The fragmented architecture, silos are everywhere. The focus is on application rather than on the data. We have lots and lots of processes that have different objectives, and we have data models that are designed independently for those objectives to deal with the reality of our functional silos. And 50-year-old technology that is not good for ad hoc query. And that's what we are now moving into. We are looking for our ability to do ad hoc scenario-based analysis. Beware of these delusions. Let me just kind of reinforce them. The first one is the single version of the truth, too much complexity. And if you ever was able to create one, it would be would not have the context needed to be able to understand what it is that the user actually needs. And when you start thinking about it philosophically, there are only 4 things that make up trusted data: identity and meaning. Those are the 2 big ones. Time, when it occurs, I can do forward thinking and backwards analysis. And then, do I trust it? Where did it come from? Was it come from Fox News or did it come from the New York Times? That is a decision that the user has to make in terms of what they want. But meaning, identity, and time are really all you need to get all contexts expressed. Again, one canonical model, too complex to build, will be out of date as soon as it's built, and requirements-led design. So beware of these delusions. They drive much of what exists in the organization. It is the nature of the problem that we have to fix. So let me take a moment then to switch sides. And point to the solution to all of these problems, right? And of course, 2 big reference points: the Tower of Babel, allow for the confusion amongst language, and Rosetta Stone being able to harmonize everything to meaning so that we can understand what is written. I made this slide for myself when I was trying to understand all of this and put it into context. And if you go over from the left side to the right, there are only kind of 3 standards that are important. There's identity, which is now solved by URLs and web addresses. IRIs are the current name. It's just internationalized, so you can represent lots of different languages. And meaning, right, which is expressed as an ontology. An ontology is simply simple facts and relationship facts captured and expressed in standards. And the web standards are the ones that we advocate. And of course, there are business rules to say, how do you calculate? And is it quality? Is it what I expect? Is it valid? With those standards, you get these 8 capabilities. And this is the value prop, right? You get quality assurance because everything is tested mathematically. So bad data that doesn't match the rule can't get into your system in the first place. You have concepts that are captured that are precise and granular so they can be reused over and over again. So you get a reduction in the cost every time you do a new use case. You can express context, as I said. You can capture control at a data point level as opposed to as a systems level. You can trace data because it's got an identifier. No matter where it goes, how it's transformed, it can be understood and found. Governance shifts from trying to reconcile meaning to making sure you understand requirements and funding and accountabilities. And everything's machine readable with continual testing, so no big bang. And when you think about it, those are huge value propositions. All of that leads to the two sides of the equation, right? There's the why we do it, the three C's: cost, capability, and control. Those are the business objectives. And there's the what we do. And most of what we're doing is integration and documentation and finding data, defining it, making it available, preventing it from getting in the wrong hands, and allowing it to be discovered. That's mostly what people are doing. What I learned from Dave is this very simple concept of data-centric, which is the opposite of having application at the center. You put data at the center because the data is the consistent thing, and let the applications conform to the data rather than the other way around. Right? When in an application-centric world, we copy things over and over and over again, sometimes hundreds of thousands of times. They all have their own data models, and then we have lots and lots of analysts that try to unravel, understand, and integrate. That's what we spend most of our energy doing. In a data-centric world, with a knowledge graph because it's processing capabilities, you got a simple model that covers almost everything that I've ever that's available in business, based in standards, the semantic trilogy: identify, describe, and express, and then no big bang, right? Think use case tree. Make sure that you understand the primary use case you're starting with and what's related to it, because that's the data you're going to fix. And then the next application becomes easier, and so on down the road. And it's kind of winds up being paying for itself by third application. You can look at the three C's, which I kind of use to describe, because that's the language that a lot of business understands about the value prop, right? The first one is cost containment. Integration and redundancy is a little over 40% of our IT budgets. Capability, this is what people want, right? They want to be able to use the data to understand relationships, query it in a flexible way, look at things from multiple different directions, and manage the complexity of their world. And then control, right? This is what the regulators talked about in BCBS 239, making sure that we can unravel the things that have been aggregated, so we can look at their granular level. We can comply with all of our obligations, and we can make sure the data doesn't get into the wrong hands. So this is our goal, right? The three C's of cost, capability, and control. Another way of looking at it, we want factual certainty. We want to know what this data is and what it represents, because it represents real things. We want flexibility so that we can use it without restructuring it, ask business questions, get business answers. And we want security to make sure that we don't, doesn't get out into unwanted hands. And all of these use cases, it's kind of funny, they all seem to fit the same ideas of those three C's. So when you look at the individual use cases, is different from the thematic use cases that we can roll everything up to. I won't go into this depth, but I'll leave it with you. This is my, I went through and I did this one slide of exactly what's required to manage data. And if you start at the top where it says foundational principles, right, that's the prerequisite. Executive cognition, understanding business requirements and priorities, big G governance, the organizational governance, and then little g governance, that's data management, and understanding the landscape of our organizations. And then data comes in, right? Mostly this is about understanding business requirements, doing the use case trees and capability models and aligning business with data, understanding criticality, making sure the service level agreements, all the stuff that you probably know. Right? And then there's systems of record. We onboard our data, we map it, we understand the processes and flows. Semantic arts does this integrate, the harvest and integrate, right? This is identity and meaning resolution, executable business rules, and mapping to our applications, right? That's the pipeline, if you will. And then at the end, we want to make sure that data is controlled so it doesn't get into the wrong hands. But it's not without cost. We know that. There is a long tail of investment because you got to change the way you operate. You need foundational ontologies of all of the big concepts of entities and agreements and agents and contract terms and dates, etc. Luckily, semantic arts, you probably can't hear that, but the construction has started up again. So luckily, Semantic Arts has an upper ontology that they make available open source called GIST. So there is a accelerator, if you will. We do need all of this basic operational reality, the scope of systems, what use cases, what are dependent on each thing, what's the target state, what's the business risk, what's the cost, etc. Understand the supply chain and manage the pipeline. That's the work that we do, if you will. There is some technology. There's triple stores, databases, quality tools, very insignificant in the overall view of things. And then people, right? So this is the challenge, right? Because we're dealing with a conceptual modeling world, not a physical structure modeling world, and that's hard for people to get their arms around, and we have to upskill those that do. And then there's the big one, right? The four horsemen of the apocalypse. I call it ignorance, arrogance, obsolescence, and power. Being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so I apologize for that. All right. I'm going to go through this one quickly, but it's kind of the same idea, right? The upfront, these are the requirements: literacy, standards, core data management, and big G governance. You got to have buy-in, you got to understand why, understand this strategically. And then there are three big ideas, right? The data side, that's the architecture that we all do. The cost value side, right? This is about understanding business reality and being able to talk in the way that business understands about the cost of data incongruence and the costs of fixing it. And then the operating model, right? This is how we build our centers of excellence or our office of data management, right? So the core things that you guys are doing, right? Documenting what exists, simplifying everything's possible, doing your inventory of architecture, establishing functional roles, getting the funding, and establishing your policies and standards. All of that is required upfront, right? And then collaborating with each side. Just remember, business cares about time to market and use case. Technology cares about scale, mapping, integration. Control about transparency and privacy. And all of this has to be understood because people look at the world through their own myopic lens. All right. I was having drinks with Chief Data Officer at the CFPB a couple years ago. Her name was Linda Powell, really outstanding person. And she was talking about the challenge that she had in explaining data management to senior management at the CFPB. So she came up with this hierarchy of data needs. I drew it out on a napkin and have since refined it a bit, but I'll give her credit. This is the Powell pyramid. At the base is all this core data management, right? That's the foundational level that everybody must do to get this embedded into the organizational ecosystem. And that's combine that with governance, right? So governance, in my opinion, is light touch, mostly about accountabilities, funding, and prioritization. And together, those are your basic needs. You have to start with that. What the business wants is trusted data, right? This is about understanding critical data attributes and understanding the meaning of things. And they want to be able to use it. They want to be able to put it into their analytical profiles on a scenario-based activity together. That's your psychological needs. And then the top of this pyramid is people want to get the data themselves. They want to make sure that they can have easy access. They can find what they need, use it as they need to without a whole lot of obstacles. And those are, when you achieve that, that's self-fulfillment. All right, let me give you my conclusions and then pass it along. First conclusion, of course, is information literacy. If you don't get the joke, you're not going to be able to manage change required and pushback that exists, right? So cognition, business value, they don't care how it works. Stop talking about how things work. They care about what it does, how long it's going to take, when am I going to get it? And fixing this problem is good. They want it. They want you to fix this problem. So first conclusion, big investment in stakeholder education. Second conclusion, this is a solvable problem. You can fix the root cause of these challenges permanently without the need for huge investments in technology and without the need for ripping and replacing, no big bang, right? Big liabilities, big upside. There are costs, but they're manageable and you can do incremental adoption. You are building, in my opinion, the infrastructure for the digital world. And if we think about it that way, the pain of transformation is a little bit more tolerable. Third, you got to do the basic stuff. All the basic hygiene, you got to, it's all essential. There is no question that it must be done. It's a prerequisite to everything. Capitalize on semantic standards whenever possible. These are the building blocks that exist. And one of the big problems in many organizations is really, even though there are chief data officers, there's no ownership over the problem of meaning incongruence at top of the house. This is all fundamental. And then finally, pick the right use case, right? Everything has to have practical value. Start small after you understand that practical value. Understand your use case trees and how things relate to each other, right? These are the most relevant things, the inventories and enterprise search and supply chain management. I'll be happy to pass on a couple of papers I've written about this. Okay. We do it kind of in minimum viable product at a single use case. We extend that to related use cases, and that's all driven by business requirements. The goal is to engineer for reusability. And then, of course, in every organization, this is a partnership. You need to have the right sponsor. You need air cover. I was doing an interview with McKinsey, and after the interview, he called me up and said, if you had one thing that you could get from senior management, what would it be? And after thinking about it for a long time, it's air cover. That's what you need because you're trying to operate in a new way. Yeah. Right. So you got to manage the organization. All right. So last slide. and I've been around now for 45 years, and I have seen three revolutions for knowledge management, not for data management, but for knowledge management. And the first one was this guy, Charles Goldfarb from IBM, who came up with SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language. So you take the IT revolution and the publishing revolution, and all of a sudden, we now have systems interoperability based on data tagging. The second one, of course, was Tim Berners-Lee, who developed the ways of managing identity resolution with HTTP and HTML. The DoD did TCP/IP, so we got rid of network challenges, and now we have systems interoperability and network interoperability. And now, I think thanks to Jim Hendler, we're standing at the intersection of data interoperability, right? And if you put these together, these are the building blocks of the digital world. Systems are now interoperable, changed the way we do business. Networks are interoperable. That was the biggest cost 20 years ago. And now we're standing at the point where data can be interoperable so that you know what it is and you can use it as you see fit. So I'm sorry to run through that so quick. I'll be happy to take any questions if you have some. I have some papers I'll be happy to give away, and I'll turn it back over to you, Terry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. That was a lot of information to take in 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And I truly respect your journey, your life's journey in the data world.
Sorry to open up the fire hose on you, Terry. But yeah, somebody gave me an opportunity, so you know.
Right. I'm really glad. I'm glad you did. I really appreciate. You actually applied context to your understanding, and applying context in history to the meaning of what it is we're really trying to do. I think at the end of the day, we're all really trying to make it easier for people to use their data, for people to trust their data, right? And there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. And I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but most of us, I suspect, in our enterprises, in our industries, we're all across the board in terms of maturity around different parts of that world of data governance and data management, where some pieces are very mature and some pieces are very immature, and trying to line up and prioritize where do we invest to, bring data, that balance between securing it, making it private and confidential where it needs to, and making it accessible and available.
Yeah,
I love you give a very, very, very nice rounded, holistic view of that ecosystem of data.
Terry, it's a really important point. We get lost in the tactics of what we have to do because it's hard and there's a lot to do. It's taken 30 years for them to get their silos built. I'm not going to unravel it in one day.
That's right.
You can always go back and realign yourself on core principle, though. And when you get too stuck on the tactical, step back and look at the core principles and make sure that we know what we are trying to achieve and how this tactic relates to that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Any comments, any questions from other folks online? Feel free to come off mute.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here, Terry, and Mike.
Yes,
I know you are so passionate about this, and I really enjoy working with you, Mike, and thank you for being part of Semantic Arts. But I know, Terry, you mentioned the holistic aspect of things, and Mike, maybe you can share a little bit on the pragmatic side during that, financial crisis and how you were dealing with some of that, and I think some of it was solved, but probably not to the extent that we need to have it done. But could you talk a little bit more about some of those pragmatic opportunities that you were able to work with?
In the midst of the crisis, Steve, we didn't know who owned who was obligated to who financed who was guaranteeing who, under what conditions. We didn't know it. We couldn't unravel it. We had they were guessing, they were flying blind. And if you just project that to your organization, you don't want to be flying blind when you're trying to make business decisions. And at the end of the day, the regulatory, that whole process of financial crisis, and actually all the crises up until then, from long-term capital to Enron to Orange County to the derivatives problem to the credit crisis, we're all about the same thing, right? The data was fragmented. It wasn't aligned to meaning. Everybody had a different view of what they were trying to do. We couldn't unravel the business aggregates, and we couldn't then reassemble them. And we had to do this in real time, and we just couldn't do it. And we still can't do it, right? We've done a little bit, so BCBS was responsible for getting the financial institutions to adopt data management, and that started a lot of it, right? But they were kicking and screaming the whole way. We now see pharma and research embracing it and making good progress. We see supply chain management and manufacturing embracing it. So I think we're starting to see the illustrations of the problem from the financial crisis now being adopted by much of the kind of information intensive industry. And that's, I think, the legacy.
I think a couple of things in there, right? I mean, part of what came out of the financial crisis was more, ownership of the thing, right? So we have the representation of the thing, which is data, which is fragmented, right?
You ain't got no choice is a good business case, Terry. So the regulators made the banks, build data management programs.
Right.
I wish we had more regulation for that around the industry.
You mentioned that you were working at CMMI, right? Measuring.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the other more challenging things for us in the data management, data governance is measuring. You want to just very briefly talk on that?
Well, sure. So throughout my early career, I was just basically taking notes of what everybody was struggling with. And like my sixth grade teacher taught me, I put it together in an outline and came up with what I thought was, what everybody was saying. And then was the founder of the data management capability model. And then I built that kind of, based on what I knew. We partnered up with CMMI and we did the CMMI for data.
Yeah.
I found CMMI to be a little bit too rigid, and they had a business objective to how to sell people on using it, and they didn't understand governance. So I was an advocate of the DMBOK for a while, although it was a little bit technical in terms of technology oriented.
Focused. Yep. Right.
But I like the DMBOK and my DCAM. We put those together, and I think that the way to understand it is fairly straightforward, right? And there are, in every one of those measurement criteria, there's 5 levels, and you can measure yourself through it and benchmark and the like. And I've now kind of documented all that, and I give it away too. So if you guys want to know, anything I learned, I'm happy to contribute to the industry. I'm working now with Dave, taking all this and applying it to how do we measure maturity, not just of core management, but how do we measure maturity of knowledge graph and semantic data management, so we can have that same kind of, because you need those metrics, right? You need to go
exactly.
I want to get from level 1.8 to level 1.9. I want to do that in the next year. I mean, overall in core data management, in a scale of 5, I think the industry is now approaching about a 3.2, my opinion, which is not bad. I'll put that on my wall as defined. Kind of they understand it. They have structures, so that's pretty
documented.
Good. The people who have adopted knowledge graph, I did benchmarking for the industry for a bunch of years. last time I did benchmarking for Knowledge Graph was like 2 years ago. We were at about a 2.1.
Okay.
You
Room
know,
for
but
improvement.
those were the early adopters.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You know, overall, we're probably at a 0.5 or something.
Any other questions or comments? Well, before we move on, Steve, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to talk about semantic arts, what they do, and how we can reach out and interact with them.
Yeah. You can certainly reach out to me. As Mike said, we've developed over the course of the 25 years a predictable and reasonably understandable methodology associated with this implementation practice, and it addresses the things that Mike talked about, the data dilemma, the data incongruence, and we do it incrementally. So we have strictly professional services. So again, we're not selling any particular product, platform, software as a service. This is really looking at things from a core problem. And some of that criteria that Mike mentioned is essential for the success. As we know, a lot of these things start with pilots. That's how we do it. We do it with your data. And so that's the meaningful part of how we engage and make certain that that data is going to answer difficult questions that before just weren't able to be answered because it was in these various silos. So that's how we get started. We take a very pragmatic approach, and we'd be happy to talk to anybody about some of these, kind of larger data strategies, or how you're wanting to deal with these data problems. And as I mentioned in the chat, is that we feel that this is the building blocks for the AI era that is in front of us. And you need to figure out your data before, I mean, your AI is just going to be bad because your data is bad. So that's a real simple equation there. So we're kind of like the plumbers in the background doing and helping along the way of this process. So I appreciate you having us on, Terry.
I really appreciate you joining us and appreciate your support. Really enjoyed the I have 1,000 questions now that I didn't have an hour ago, which is good. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And if we want, Mike, some of that information you have available, do you have a source for us?
So luckily, Dave McComb and I got together and rewrote their entire website, and I did it because I wanted to publish everything I learned. So all of this stuff is up on our website free of charge, no registration required. You can go to our website and read it. You can get the resources, activities, everything. We're trying to educate the world.
Thank you.
The reason I came to Semantic Arts, though, is because they can do everything that I've been preaching. So, there's two sides of the equation, right? Educate yourself and then, fix it.
Right. And I think Terry, in the chat, I mentioned go to the resources tab at our Semantic Arts website and just sift through that. There's videos, there's articles, there's blogs. We are very active in the social community. We have free streaming series that are talking about various industry problems associated with this very much data issue. And some of the trends that are going on, and some of those are touching on data products and data fabrics, and it's just a wide area of discovery that we are providing. So go to our LinkedIn, and we do have a following there. So please join us and join some of those sessions. I think you'll be very pleased with the educational aspect of it.
And feel free to onward redistribute slides so people can use it without worrying about it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're here.
We'll
we're here to help.
publish those. Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.